sort of your, your wheelhouse, so I'm trying to learn here. You put an interest rate of roughly 2% on that, right? And then essentially we roll the bands up into one, and then we put the debt out into the secondary and roll up a 30-year bond. Are we assuming, or is your assumption in 10 years that, the coupon rate on a bond is going to be 5%?
Well, we are pegging to that number for the purposes of the agreement, and I think those rates are lower than that number. And so we're trying to bake in some anticipation for increases, but we're not trying to model the very worst case scenario, certainly.
I mean, would you call it conservative, moderately conservative?
I would call it likely to conservative. It's certainly not an aggressive assumption by any means. But back to the point that Mr. Curie made about the urgency here. Though time is not our friend, right? In the sense that, and it's not just interest rate growth, it's construction cost escalations.
Market cycles.
How long will the music last? There are a variety of things that create risk that can only be solved by getting a project underway and getting that those GMP contracts locked in, again, not just for the development, but for the development too. So I think all of us were mindful of those things and not, we're taking that seriously. But as far as the forecasts are concerned, I think we're feeling very confident that we're, as long as this doesn't drag out for too much longer, that we're going to be in a position to deliver feasibility with a financeable project. Again, not just for the development, but for the parking garage too. But that's for another night.
And that's why I say everything just sort of adds up to the sum, because as Mrs. Geary had laid out, the TIF district is designed to be fully self-supporting off new revenues. So if those new revenues aren't fully supporting that new debt generated in the TIF district, there's only one other place to pay for it. And it's not the TIF district. So as I ask these questions, I'm really just trying to understand, as we project forward, what type of stance are we taking?
What's the composite?
Exactly. So thank you. I'm sure you'll be involved in many of these discussions going forward, and I appreciate your professionalism. You're very insightful. I just have one final question. I was writing down notes rather quick here and didn't capture everything for the council. Mr. Davis?
Yes. Yes.
Good evening, Councilor. So I was writing some notes down post-close, and I wrote after close, construction begins in 90 days. Is that?
That's right.
That's correct. And then the project is completed in 17 months. That's the part of it.
Yes.
17 months. So I guess my question was around, and I know that Council Finn had alluded to it. What are the safeguards for the city to make sure that, right, if we're basically moving forward on a land disposition agreement under the assumption that we're building a 15-story building, if for some reason the market corrects and, basically we're not going to support a 15-story building anymore, the project timeline is rather condensed.
And that's sort of the benefit.
Say one more time?
That's a benefit in a way that it is condensed.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think you have to realize that on projects of this magnitude, they don't start until the mortgage financing is fully in place and is available for funding.
Makes sense.
You just don't take the risk that somehow you're going to get the loan closed. Too many capital commitments. And essentially, once the project starts, the lenders should almost always are committed to finishing that project. They're not thrilled maybe with the end result if there's been a bad downturn, but they generally, once they start, they finish, because something partially completed has a negative value, and they're better off to advance the rest of the loan that they've already authorized and finish the project. So that's sort of the way it works. So And in terms of safeguards, there are heavy financial penalties for the developer not to stray from the schedule. So that's pretty significant. First it's 100,000, then it goes 200,000, and it ratchets up from there. So on a monthly basis. So there's no upside in stopping.
No upside in what?
In stopping once you've started.
Right.
Much better off to finish. And I think the important thing to know here is that I mentioned that until the project's completed, the redeveloper can't transfer its interest. So essentially, in this case, you do have Peter O'Connell's commitment to get this done. He can't just sell it halfway done to somebody else. He has to make sure it's finished. So I think that's an important factor here.
I think another important factor is once the finance security of 17 months to go, like I said, even a short shift in interest rates, and the financing will be locked in at that point.
That's correct. And that's part of the urgency in terms of Peter cannot go to the lending community. He specifically expects to deal with HUD, with whom his firm has a long-standing relationship. And there have been some preliminary discussions with HUD, and they're very favorably disposed. But they can't begin to consider the project until he can show them that he has a signed contract with the OBA to acquire the real estate. Because otherwise, from their perspective, they'd just be wasting time perhaps. So that's why the urgency of trying to get the contract done. But obviously, as I think Mr. Geary laid out, there are many more pieces for this council to consider and act on before this can all be executed. It essentially allows the city on the one hand to move on the track of finalizing, understanding and finalizing arrangements for the construction of the garage, undertaking the necessary infrastructure work, and committing to make the takings. That's sort of one track, and sort of go back, Councilor Finn, what you were asking, timeline, and executing the LDA soon allows O'Connell to pursue his timeline in terms of getting the financing commitment in place, so that when all those two lines come to their conclusion, there is a project that can be executed. And so that's the thinking. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Finn, still a good question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam
Councilor
Chairman.
Finn and Councilor DeVos.
And it goes back to, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. You know, I don't think you should recognize me, but that's another.
You said one follow quick.
It is, yeah, it is. It's very quick. It's just basically back to Pam. I know some of the work that you provide, and it might actually be a question for the redeveloper, but some of the early work when we were envisioning this change away from the master developer and this different approach, but I think it was alluded to some level of consulting, so to speak, as it applied specifically to the integration of retail into mixed use. And so one of the things that I really haven't heard, and I don't know if it's a question for the redeveloper, I know around Greater Boston, some of the places that have been very successful have actually dealt with people who are targeting specific retail in relation to that. Is there any vision the redeveloper has at this point related to the integration of that retail into their residential project?
No, retail on the first floor only.
I understand that, but I mean, is there any, do you have any idea what that is at this point, or whether that's going to work in the sense of having retail on the first floor?
No, we haven't gone to market yet.
Okay. All right.
I'll say one thing.
That would be helpful.
I think it's safe to say that in some environments, developers would like to start construction on the second floor. Because dealing with the first floor space is always, there's an element of uncertainty to who it's going to be and how you're going to market it and so on. I think that down in Quincy, having first floor retail space in this particular location is actually quite important. And while the proponent here may not have a specific idea as to who that retailer might be, given its juxtaposition relative to the park that's being created, I think we can expect that that retailer is going to provide, you know, environmental quality, let's just say, on the ground floor, so that we've got some activity, you know, from a public benefits perspective, contributing to the not just economic activity, but to the liveliness of that environment. So I see it as an important element. Again, it's never usually a big contributor to the economics of the project. Retail rating is at this scale. So that's not the reason to do it. The reason to do it is because it makes a contribution to the environmental feel.
Not just to this project, but what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
And so I guess the question is in terms of the larger vision of this, I mean, who's the person that, I mean, are you still being engaged in some manner in relation to this or whatever? Because you wouldn't want to create a scenario with empty retail space in those areas.
I have confidence that it's in the right place, it's right size for where it is. There should be retail on the ground floor. I don't think that this is space that you would give over to parking or throwaway space. But you know, it's the developer's job to populate it and to develop a concept for how it would be marketed. But we're not responsible for that part. We just know that it's an important aspect of the program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, Councilor Vaughn.
We do have a consultant who is working with us, the BSC group, and they're working on developing those aspects of the plan.
As it relates with this project, well, they'd be working with the redeveloper essentially.
Since the inception.
And ensuring one of the points that Pam made earlier, which to me has always been one of the real fundamental assertions, that we're actually creating a market for that retail. So I'm trusting whatever choices to go in there, that it's going to be something that actually does contribute.
Yes, and of course, we're watching those projects that are now coming online, such as west of Chestnut, and in the future Clyde Place. So we're hoping that each of these projects is synergistic in building that civic space, that placemaking goal that's articulated in the URUP.
Great, thank you.
All right, Councilor DeBona.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I would like to bring up Pam if I could.
Dan, why don't you take this?
Take a closer chair.
I want to thank you, all of you, for all your presentations tonight, all your hard work on this. I want to thank the other councilors here tonight that have spoken earlier and great questions. I just listening and thinking about this, I mean, this goes down to being one of the biggest things that's happened in this city, I think, of all time. Because 15 stories is monumental. I mean, this sets the tone for the entire city. I don't know any of the projects that's going on that'll be this caliber. With that being said, we talked a little bit about Back Bay, we talked about South End, we talked about some of the Boston areas that are able to do these types of structures, I guess you can say. And with that said, when you do a building of that structure, this is going to be a luxury apartment. Is that correct? I mean,
certainly with respect to Quincy, you know, the price point is high.
and when I ask that question, I'm thinking to myself that this has to be a higher apartment rental than the west of Chestnut, than the Deco, than the average dwelling in the city. You better with numbers than I would this be a 20% increase?
You know, I hate to peg a percentage, but it's certainly an increment above. There's no question.
Sure. And why I ask all these questions and thinking is the fact that, this is the integral part to the garage, and there's other parcels in here that are mixed use, R2, R3. there's a hotel near H1. With all these moving parts of stuff going on in the northern part of the city, which is the MBTA, the middle of the city now with the hospital, all these moving parts that are going on. I don't know if you were in the building last week with the tax rate, but it was up, and we have to pay a little bit of an increase every year. With that being said, I would think that the values of these houses are going to increase because of these type of developments. With your experience, is that going to be around the right, I guess, scenario or outlook?
I can't comment on what the incremental impact might be from this project on, that Brookville's house,
Sure.
3 blocks over. I guess what I would say is that a project like this makes possible development of land that would not otherwise be possible. And I think that's more how I think about that catalytic effect. Certainly, the evolution of the downtown will result in value changes in response to market and so on. But I think redevelopment and revitalization activities are at least initially, certainly in the early stages of a program like this, aimed at delivering feasibility where none exists, and allowing for a mix of uses to occur where a mix of uses might not be possible.
How does this benefit some of the residents and the taxpayers that are already living here? For instance, going around this table here on the council, a lot of us have young children, and the ones that don't have young children have kids that are in college. So you're looking at 2 variables that cost more money to provide a family. What's that?
I've got one of those colleges.
You have one of those colleges. I'm sitting next to a few people that have a couple of kids in college that are paying something cheap. But with that being said, I mean, the housing market looks like it's going to increase. So if the housing market increases, and every year we get down to the budget, and we get down to the tax rate, and I have to pay more out of my pocket every year, how am I going to be able to afford to live here? Now, let me ask you, now this is a loaded question. The loaded question is, with all this development going on, how does it benefit the taxpayer? At what point of all this development does it really benefit? I'm just going to put it on one knee. How does it benefit me as a taxpayer with all this development? And listen, I'm pro-development. That's not the issue. The issue is when does it benefit me? Because in a nutshell, I might not be able to afford everything that's going on in that district. It may be affordable for people that may be moving to the district. So how do you sell me on the fact of this is going to benefit the people that are already living there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about your tax structure and exactly what comprises the values, where the values sit.
This is the important question.
So it's not really my bailiwick to, and I wouldn't want to give an off-the-cuff answer. It's not a good idea if you're not armed with the information. But I do think that understanding the economic uplift from the downtown has been something that's been talked about for a long time. I don't think that that's a new topic, certainly. And I think that the diff story is a little bit about that story, and so I think RKG is probably in a better position to discuss the details of it. I'm nothing if I'm not what's the right word I'm searching for? I'm loath to talk through my hat.
Sure.
Especially when I'm not wearing them. And so I think you're asking an interesting question. It has, I'm sure, quite a detailed answer that someone would need to know a lot more about than I do standing before you tonight. But again, I think it's something that's been talked about, and the RKG folks can probably give you a better perspective on it.
Sure. I'm just here.
Thank you, Councilor. I think it's an excellent question. And once again, it goes to the issue of balance. And when I've appeared before the council in the past, remember, we're at the very beginning of this process. And using the vision that we developed in the UIDP, there was a concept that if you build housing, jobs will follow, businesses will follow. And we're in, right now, the very first of these projects. But the key and the missing element up until last week, in some respects, was major potential commercial development. That's the balance that needs to be struck. And while we're looking to unlock the development potential of the Hancock lot with this particular residential development and the garage and the civic activities that will go along with it, we have seen some of that trend that had been predicted, that some of the businesses follow where people are, as Pam said, you're building a community where there was an amount of consumers. The other thing I noticed when I'm driving here in the morning is I see people walking their dog. So it tells you that as these buildings get populated, these folks are frequenting restaurants and whatever stores are available. So we're looking to Councilor Finn's question about the retail activity following the residential. But the big provider of tax relief for all of us, and we're all residents, will be increased commercial activity. And that commercial activity, in some way, will also follow a workforce that wants more now than ever, to be able to walk to work after they walk the dog. So they want to work, live in the community where they work. They want a whole community that provides options for their family to enjoy their community. And so that's the synergy. And it's, as Pam said, it's kind of slow. And she mentioned the World Trade Center, when I knew it as the Commonwealth Pier.
Exactly.
And I was a taxi driver who used to drive in there to drop off stevedores. So I remember what it was like before it became the World Trade Center. And that was incremental. And we're still at the incremental stage. You may recall me saying from this podium that we weren't there yet. But I feel the mountain moving a bit, certainly with last week's announcement. And all of this is going to have a greater effect than any one individual project will have. And hopefully will help us achieve the balance that's going to give some relief to residential property payers as commercial activity increases.
I'm sorry, Pam, I knew the answer.
I know you did.
From all of us, that we're all on the same page. And I mentioned this in the past, that administration, councils, we're all on the same page, one common goal, to move the city forward and give a little relief to the residential base, which is the commercial. And if we're all on the same page that we want to build that commercial base up, because as we build more units, residential, we're adding to the percentage of residential compared to commercial. And that's where we need to find a way of mixed use,
Yes.
of retail,
Yes.
of commercial, and finding other areas of the city as well as everything that's in our URBP, or, you know, like you mentioned before. So this is going to pay back everything that's invested.
Yes.
And more?
I don't know if I want to say and more, but everything that's invested. The benefits, as you know, there's radiating benefits from these activities and from these commercial enterprises. So the key here is to make the investments with the tools that we have, such as the DIF and the bands, and all of these tools all have a purpose. And when you get commercial development, and you get the prospect for state funding from IQs because it's generating jobs. So we're providing jobs to our residents, and they're providing, those commercial enterprises are providing taxes to the city.
I just thank you for your time.
Thank you,
for your
sir.
presentation. I'm looking forward to more discussion. My fellow councilors talking about more of the questions that may be in the future.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
I think we're getting close to wrapping up for this evening. I know we have an important football game ongoing. No spoiler alerts, please. So I do have a couple of questions that I would like to ask. And so Pam, I'm just going to start with you because I feel like Council Calmucci pinged on this a little bit and we called it the cosmic convergence. And I just wanted to reiterate how I interpret it. You basically said the market would dictate if if this was for sale, what would be built? Well, a developer could come in and do a pedestal, 6-story pedestal, 5 stories, and make X amount of profit. What I heard from you was this 15-story project is going to have a profit equivalent to the stick-over pedestal. Was that what you were saying?
I'm saying that the tax potential
The tax potential
is the same,
is the same.
yes, on a per unit basis.
On a per unit, but there's a lot more units exceeding.
Yes.
Okay. I was trying to come back to why, as we're trying to push forward, and I completely agree, what kickstarts the redevelopment of downtown. We have a lot of old, tired properties that have been held. If you look at, this last sale of many of them, there's been decades. And these landowners have chosen not to invest and to leave their properties in their existing conditions. So for us to say, I think the city put out a really good framework when we went through the Streetworks project, talking about the desire for redevelopment downtown, redoing URDP. When we looked at our zoning laws for the first time since the 60s, it really was trying to make these parcels more development friendly. I actually, Councilor Coughlin, if you're watching at home, I didn't bring the whole boxes of our last iteration of downtown LDAs, but I did bring some, including our old Hancock lot assessment, which is really completely apples and oranges, looking at the whole 5-acre parcel. And part of, in looking back through my notes, it was that this didn't even anticipate the existing conditions of the URDP because it hadn't passed yet. So what the development capacity potential was didn't exist when they were giving us this assessment. So now looking at it years later, so this I think is dated 2008, 2009, we're looking at it as we have capacity that didn't exist before. So at first I thought, well, we might get big value when looking at this. And yes, in reflection, but completely different situation.
Underpinnings, the highest and best uses.
Great, thank you. The other question, so maybe for Mr. Geary, is we're talking about the 13,000 square foot parcel that's a part of this particular project. So
I'm sorry, Councilor.
Yep.
Talking about the...
So the 13,000 square foot parcel.
Yes.
That will be transferred, ownership transfer.
That is correct.
When we talk about the public park portion, so let me go here. We're talking about friendly takings of the block of 23 and 31 Cottage Ave in Exhibit E.
Correct.
Right, so that's the block Carmel Lounge down to Leon's Finer Cut, the Bridal Secret, that strip, and there's a little gap in the forest. So that block. On the friendly takings that's referenced, or the takings that are referenced, I'm assuming that you and I had a discussion earlier today that they're friendly, but this landowner is open to transacting with the city.
Yes.
Is
Of course, that's always dependent upon the meeting of the minds between the two parties.
in the price that the city,
Exactly, on
the
the
city
price.
will expend to acquire those parcels?
That is
That's on
correct.
the city, that's not on the developer. Are those buildings then get demolished in the public space like Councilor Calmucci was talking about? We are still creating pocket parks in downtown as originally, as the original concept put together. The public park, is that a portion that is those buildings? And that
Yes.
the city, so when the city takes this land, the city will then retain the ownership. However, as part of the LDA, it's abutting, their construction project abuts this, and they will construct the park on this public land.
That is correct.
So none of the taken land will then go to the developer.
I did, no. Only the 13,526 feet.
That the city currently owns. Every inch the
That
developer
is
will
correct.
get, the city,
That is-
we do not need, while we would like this public park to transact, but we would
that
like
is
this
correct.
taking, this project isn't contingent necessarily upon that taking,
That-
and that park creation.
That is correct. The taking is for the purpose, three purposes. One is for the relocation of the sewer line. The other is for the park. And the other is for a widening of the road to provide access. And I believe there was a portion of that, if not all of it, that is actually a portion of the garage is underneath.
Portion, I don't think so. The way the
Okay.
garage, you heard Quincy said earlier, and
All right.
that's what I made
That's
note
on the other
of,
side.
because the garage is closer to, I guess that's my portion, where your road,
It's
right?
on the other side.
It
Okay.
becomes, right, yes.
Okay.
Okay, I will say, when you talk about public space, I think anyone will agree, as you enter Marina Bay, they always do a great job maintaining our landscaping with a very welcome to the public. And so that's something that's important, that you look at your green space around and what is the image that you're portraying. And I think that everyone will agree that Marina Bay does a great job with that.
Yes.
Okay. Relative to the garage, I know that's a big piece of this discussion, and as we've talked about, whether it's HDIP, whether it's the TOD, when we talk about the process versus the permitting, and a lot of us are seeing the need for the garage, obviously see the need for the garage, see the need for the public infrastructure, yet it's difficult, and I'm sure, so for the public to separate church and state, what we need to do relative to the garage, and that discussion will have a complete public vetting. We're
Right.
looking at February, so while we are the concept is in this document, again, the details are to be worked off down the line with its own public process, as well as the permitting of Mr. O'Connell's project.
That is
This
correct.
Chestnut Place project is an extensive permitting process to go through.
That is correct.
I will say, part of the street works residual that's left over in the positive realm is the NEPA permitting process for that project. The city maintained is a co-applicant in that gets to carry through,
That's
which
correct.
would have substantially slowed this project down as we're talking about time.
Oh, yes.
I do want to jump, I guess, into the timeline. We have referenced in LDA Section 4, talks about the closing 14 months after the DHCD approval. I was trying to put together the timeline for the public relative to this project. So for us to close this deal, transferring the land, we will be waiting 14 months after state.
I believe
Does someone want to clarify? I'm not sure who's best to pose that question to.
Mr. Davis may want
Mr.
to
Davis.
respond to that, but as I believe it's the outside date.
You're correct.
That is-
Outside date, so
That's the
within
outside.
that.
That was a contingency to put a longer period of time predicated on their ability to get the financing and other aspects of their project together.
Something I didn't want to delve into tonight, but something I will, my questions next week, is relative to the Streetworks deal and how the protections we put in place protected the city, and what if things like they weren't able to get some of their financing, which brings us to where we are today.
Right.
And so to kind of talk about what changed, what did we learn from the Streetworks agreement that's been incorporated into this, so I'll save those questions for next week.
Okay?
I did have a note I made about repurchase rights and the money in escrow. You and I talked about that
Yes.
when we met earlier, but I wrote down number 10 in the LDA, and that's not where that is. Did you want to talk about the opportunity for the city to maintain ownership if things were to go wrong on the repurchase rights?
Well, it's similar to an escrow account.
Yeah.
Whoever best.
That provision is really kind of a backstop. In
Excellent.
other words, the assumption is that that the closing will only occur when the financing is in place. And so that's a limited opportunity. If for some reason the financing is going to occur, but it makes sense to have the developer acquire title and start the work before the financing is closed, then that opportunity is available in that case. The developer doesn't get it off the ground and the city can repurchase it. Once the financing is in place, and we think practically speaking that's going to be at the time of closing, that at that point the money's going to be available, contract will be in place to construct the building, it will be a totally different situation.
Best case scenario, filing for planning board approval for the project would begin.
I may be speaking out of turn. I think the preliminary application is actually been
Before the
filed
board.
so that the planning board can begin vetting and design elements of this.
And assuming, and I see Mr. Stevens here, assuming that this is, I guess what would be the best case scenario for construction to begin, assuming planning approval in a timely manner?
I think you can respond to that. That's correct. I mean, I think
I guess it's a, you know, we hear on long timelines, right? And there's a lot of anxiety out there in the public. I think as we saw the tree lighting happen in downtown and, you know, the temporary public space in between City Hall, people are really starting to visualize what's happening. And so now as we talk about this project, you know, people need an understanding of the timeline because around the well, we deal with permitting every day. And if you're the public and you're watching this, you're not understanding the infrastructure work, permitting work, and the timeline of all the homework that gets done before the shovel goes in the ground and we start constructing. So I guess that's what I'm just trying for our at-home viewer to respond to. Loosely.
Yeah. I would say in the fall of next year.
So fall 2017 would be our best case scenario construction beginning. And
Of both the garage and the tower.
And not necessarily is there a delay to the construction of the garage relative with DHCD coming in. We could get the design agreement in place with the garage. The garage could potentially lead the residential structure, the mixed-use structure. The other one I just wanted to point out that I appreciate, I know Councilman Cummings, this was a big long contention for us during the LDA, was, you know, the assignment clause. Who's responsible, who's the LLC, and who are the responsible parties, and there was just so much movement pieces. So I know for myself, it was great to see that was clarified. We know who we're working with, we know who the development team is, we know who the project team, and they're all known entities. And I think that, again, takes away some of the anxiety from the public. So, did anyone have any follow-up questions? We're up against 9:30. We have a slated follow-up meeting next Monday. Yeah.
Don't you think he's asking for a document?
Yes.
From Carlos, I believe it's pronounced. I just wanted to know if you can get a copy of that slide because the presentation you put in there was really helpful. I think it gave a lot of layers to what the project's going to look like, and we didn't get a copy of that.
That slide might have been missing from the printed packet.
Yeah, that's one.
There's a few of them.
Yeah, there were some site plans that we were missing.
We have the document ready.
All right, come on.
Anybody else? With that, we will adjourn this meeting and reconvene next Monday, I believe at 6:30 p.m. Meeting adjourned.
Go Collins.